Hey everybody, Stu Smith here with another Tactical Fitness Report, and we have back Nick Barringer. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, it's great to be back, Stu. I love being back on the show and catching up with you anytime.
Well, we love what you're doing, and if you're not familiar with Nick Barringer, we're going to talk about what Nick Barringer is doing. He's been on this podcast, I think, 3 other times. We've talked about optimal performance, we've talked about longevity, we've talked about nutrition for Spec Ops fitness tests, talked about nutrition supplements for joint health. So
Yes.
this is your 5th time being on. So thank you for joining us again, because let me tell
Anytime.
you, anytime you can have Nick Barringer, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Army, PhD, you got a CSSD, which is a board certification and specialist in sports dietetics. He's a registered
Yeah.
dietitian, nutritionist, and retired Army Lieutenant Colonel on top of it all, and went to Ranger School. Ranger bat back there, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man,
so
you're right, Stu.
you
You know it all, man.
you have done it all, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on here for the Tactical Fitness Report, because you have been doing some really neat things since you have retired. So tell us a little bit about your transition out of the Army and what's going on right now.
Yeah, so I retired from the Army officially 30 August, 31 August. Yeah, it was like, 1 September. Was that so pretty, recent now, although we're coming up on a year. If anybody's listening to this and currently in the military and you're kind of getting towards that, end, that sunset, the sooner you can start, you can never start soon enough. I think that's the advice you talk to anybody who's retired, you'll get. And I probably started a little later, but had a great opportunity to do the Skill Bridge program, which is out there, which is the Navy, the Air Force. It's an unbelievable program. Again, if you have an opportunity to do that, do it. I worked with a guy by the name of Martin Rooney, who's a coach, runs the Training for Warrior gyms. And so working with him, and, he kind of coached me through, business and entrepreneurship, stuff we don't learn in the military. And then a great opportunity came up at a university called Lionel University that just focuses on exercise science. So just human performance, just exercise science. And
Nice.
they were hiring him as the chancellor. And so they needed a chief academic officer. And he's like, I got you. I've got your guy. And so I became their chief academic officer right as I left the military. And I've been doing that since, and contract work and other things. But, it just goes to show you just those relationships you build. Because I met Martin when I was at the Ranger Regiment. He came out and actually he did a training for us. So he did a training for us and just stayed in contact with him, for over a decade, and would just, follow up, exchange ideas, kind of like we do, Stu. And
Sure.
And then, the opportunity came to work with him, and took it. So you never know.
Well, tell me this. I see you have been a lot more prolific on your social media. Right? What happened there? I know when you're active duty military, sometimes it's hard to get on the social media and post things, whether even if it's just as innocuous as nutritional facts.
Yeah.
Is hard to do. So since you've been out, and if you don't follow Nick on Instagram, you should. It's nickbarringer.phd.rdn, and I'll have the link to that in the description. And you're going to learn so much from his Instagram, because what he does is he takes all these studies that are out there on nutrition and fitness and physiology, psychology, and describes them, breaks them down, from a PhD level to something that, I be quite frank with, is a little more easily to consume. Because sometimes, Nick, I don't know about you, but I'll read an abstract and have to read it over again, and that's the easiest part of the study. Like, I'm just nervous getting into the rest of the study, because it's going to be like, whoosh, go right over my head. But you break it down so nicely. So, what gave you that idea?
Well, just, one, needed to be a little more active. I got some prodding from a colleague about being more active on Instagram, and then you alluded to it. I think when you're retired, I mean, there's definitely active duty influencers now, which is a little new. When I was in, it wasn't as much, and then at one point, like, social media was,
Oh yeah,
my Instagram account, just to show you guys, like, I wasn't on Facebook, I wasn't on Instagram until 10 years ago, and it was my wife, like, set it up for me. So
yeah,
I was always hesitant. But I wanted to put more information out there. And then my background, what I felt like I had a talent for, was I was never like this unbelievable researcher, right? I was at the U.S. Army Research into Environmental Medicine, and I learned very quickly, like, man, those people, they're just a different level. I was like an elementary school basketball player going to the NBA. Like, I just
yeah,
learned from them. I mean, they're just, Dr. Phil Carl, Dr. Lee Margolis, Dr. Jessica Gwen, naming some of this research. I got to work for Dr. James McClung and his wife Holly McClung.
yeah.
I mean, they do unbelievable high level research, and I'm like, I can't hold the candle to it. But what I felt like I was able to do was to take their research, or a lot of times when they want to do a research project with, like, a military unit, right, and go in there to that infantry commander and explain why that research was important. I was the guy. I could do that,
Yeah.
right? I could go in and be
You're
like,
the translator.
I was the translator. I could go in and be like, this is why you need to do this, because, and it usually ended with, it's going to impact, lethality this way or survivability this way. And so always kind of having that skill set, that's where I kind of saw, like, okay, there's all this research out there that I don't think, folks know about or might be following, or, like you said, you read the abstract, you don't really get it. So it's like, let me break it down so it's palatable. And most of the people I've worked with or continue to work with, and same with you, is like the tactical space. And, we were just talking when Stu started, like, there was nobody else in it. Like, because I remember, like, looking for training programs when I was a new lieutenant, and it was Stu Smith, or that was it. Like, that was the only. And now it's really exploded with the global war on terror. There's been a lot of great research that comes out. So breaking that down to something that's digestible, that anybody can interpret.
Hey, you know what? You turn a study into a comic book, and it is really easy. Got cool pictures, kind of infographic, kind of a model that does it, and you go from one end of the spectrum to the other. I mean, I'm looking at things about brain health and collagen as some of your first ones, and cabbage and gut health. You
Yeah.
know, the effects of alcohol, optimal performance, fitness testing, music, how it affects the brain. I mean, this is all incredible stuff.
This is how my brain works, Stu. That's what we were talking about. Is, I have a little bit of ADD when it comes to my interest, and I love all things human performance. I
Yeah.
love all things. I mean, I'm obviously passionate about nutrition. I'm a dietitian, but, coaching cues, or the psychology, or all those aspects, I'm interested in it. And so since I'm reading these papers anyway, I thought, well, might as well go ahead and break them down.
No, this is really good. In fact, why don't we take a few
Okay.
and just break them down? I tell you what, I'm going to just share my screen, and you
All right.
should be able to still see it. So this one here is unlocking the secrets of Army Ranger physical success, and this is how these things look, and he's got all the key findings right here, to discuss right there in the description, and as you flip through this, you know, really neat stuff. But you have a great format for breaking this down.
Yeah, and that study right there, that was done. I really had fun doing that one. So you picked a study I actually did. So not only did I break down the study, I wrote that paper with some colleagues, Dr. Joe Cardoni,
Mm-hmm.
was an Army physical therapist, now down at Georgia Southern with their tactical institute. He just stood up. And then a great human performance coordinator, Nick O'Brien at the 75th Ranger Regiment. And what Nick does there is just unbelievable. Like if you look at like the best Ranger competitors, all the people he greets, but he keeps meticulous records on all the data, on all these metrics. And so he had all this data, and what we wanted to do was, okay, what matters? So from the Ranger athlete warrior assessments, the broad jump, the 300-yard shuttle, there was a tactical assessment called the RPAT. So the Ranger Physical Assessment Test, where you get a run in kit, you get to climb a rope, and everybody kind of agrees in that community that that's probably the test that's most related. I'm always hesitant to say related to combat because, as you know, I mean, that can vary, but sure. Most of those Rangers who've experienced it would say, if there's one physical test that mimics like what I've, done on the objective or some of the things that can happen, it's the RPAT. And so we wanted to see what gym measurements, correlated best with the RPAT. And so
that's one of my favorite things to read. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a lot of fun doing it. And again, Nick's done some great stuff. And so, we found the broad jump, pull-ups, and 300-yard shuttle. So lower body explosive power, right?
Yep.
Pulling strength, not, sadly not bench press. I know there's probably some guys out there a little disappointed, but, your pulling strength, and then that anaerobic capacity, because, it's a 300-yard shuttle rest, another 300-yard shuttle. And so those were the kind of the main predictive factors of how well you would do on that RPAT.
Yeah, the RPAT, 2-mile run with all your uniform and kit. You have obstacle course, Skedco drag, which is, I tell you what, not easy. It is not an easy to pull sled.
The friction coefficient is quite high, and it depends, especially depending on what surface you're on.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I tell you what. One time I made the mistake of just being trying to be creative, and tied some rope to a tire. Right. And we started dragging it, and we had a little hook around the waist. We started dragging it, but we were on a rubberized turf field, which I don't know what happened. Both ends just grabbed. It was like the hardest thing ever to pull, but then we put it on grass and everybody was flying. So you're right. It does matter for that. So in this one, it really came down surprisingly to speed and power.
Yeah.
On this one, and strength. I always talk about strength. Pull-ups being the heavy lifting of the calisthenics world.
Yes.
And if you can do pull-ups, you've shown you have strength to do one, and then you have an increased muscle stamina to do 20. Right. So you've taken strength out of a little bit out of the process, but that muscle stamina is critical with body weight plus movements.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's, I mean, if you look at all of those, I mean, really, you get back to that is mastering your body weight, because a broad jump is how we measure lower body power. So that's in there, and then the 300-yard shuttle, you got to carry your own engine. So I think there's also that piece, which I really like, is all three of those assessments have a body weight / body composition piece of it. So again, and this sounds blasphemous as a dietitian, but you don't have to do a bod pod necessarily. You don't have to do body comp or whatever, because my thing is, if you can crush a broad jump, some pull-ups, and a 300-yard shuttle, your body comp is probably in line. It's pretty well. I don't need to check it. Like you're doing okay. Otherwise, you're paying the price.
Yeah, I would agree, because you have to have a relatively high ratio of muscle to fat,
right?
In that in those events. It's hard to see somebody whose body comp is not in line
Right. And if so, they're a
Those.
mutant, and I'll give them a pass.
Right, right.
If you show me like a 300-pound ranger who can jump, do pull-ups, and crush a 300-yard shuttle, I'll be like, hey, that's your breacher right there.
Well, you know what? That's funny you should mention that because the Marine Corps actually implemented that into their
Yeah.
training. Like if they didn't meet the body fat percentages, but they crushed this,
Yeah.
the fitness test and the combat fitness test, didn't matter.
Yeah, the
It,
army
yeah.
the army started doing that, and I don't know if they
Yep.
put the cutoff for the AFT. They did for the ACFT as well, and yeah, I mean, again, as a dietitian, I tend to agree because those folks are so rare, that are out there, and then you do have some people who are just they're just big people, right? They're just big humans, like the an extreme, but like the Brian Shaws of the world, or the
Oh,
strongman type guys that are just they're never going to be skinny or a certain that. But it's like if you can move like that and you have that strength and you have that power, I want you on my team.
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about when you read these. What the posts on Nick's Instagram is they're just breakdowns of these studies that have been proven as these are facts, right? And you can start understanding okay why this is important and start implementing it to you, especially if you've assessed yourself in these tests and you realize there's some weaknesses. I mean, part of an assessment is to be honest and then realize, okay, I have these strengths and weaknesses that I have just assessed. Let's focus on these weaknesses because I promise you, if you're doing any of these spec ops jobs or any tactical job for that matter, a weakness will be exposed at some point. And
Yeah.
whether it's in your training or it's you're trying to save your life or someone else's life, that weakness will be exposed. And you know it could change things abruptly to a point where you're no longer an asset and now you're the liability that has to be saved. So
Yeah.
that's where I am when I'm coaching young kids, and their seriousness to serve is usually tested by how willing they are to work on their weakness.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Nobody
Because
likes to do what they're not good at. That's
no.
the you nailed it. And so and if you notice too, and why I put like this study was with MARSOC, I believe.
Hmm.
I was trying to get different groups, some SEAL studies, some special forces, some Rangers, and all, because you kind of, I mean, you notice a theme, right?
Yep.
There's never like one thing like, oh, you just got to be strong, or just be able to swim to be a SEAL or whatever. They're all a holistic assessment, and there's usually an aerobic component, a power component, an anaerobic component. Just like you said, Stu, is like you need to be the total package. You
Yeah.
can't come with any, and it doesn't mean you need to be world class in all those packages, right?
No.
It's just you just need to not have like a glaring deficiency. I used to say at Ranger Regiment when I was with the Ranger Athlete Warrior Program, and we assessed probably. I was there 5 years, so we probably assessed thousands of Rangers, through the physical assessments. And I was like, I never came across a Ranger who was world class at anything, or even
Oh,
maybe they're high collegiate, but it
not
was
even
more,
close.
their bandwidth. Now,
Yeah.
their bandwidth is what made them kind of world class. I'd say they were like a supreme generalist because, I would have a Ranger who could deadlift 500 pounds, which a 500-pound deadlift in the powerlifting world, nobody
Not world
raises.
class. Yeah.
But then they can run, a 12-minute 2 mile, which in the running world, nobody would, again, raise an eyebrow or think that's impressive. But a 500-pound deadlifter who can run a 12-minute 2 mile, you put those together, that's pretty impressive. So
I would agree. I would agree. And then you throw swimming with that in there, and now there's like you just took it
yeah,
another level. Oh, and
yeah,
rucking, and the ability to ruck. I mean, you're right. I mean, all of this, like you mentioned, the common theme here, like these little check marks in this in the description that you have, improved anaerobic power, maintained VO2 max, strength and endurance, recovered from grueling ANS phases. Those are like the key takeaways whenever you have these type of training models. in here. Is that what this study did?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was I believe this one
Yeah.
was the one. It was between like an training phases,
Yep.
so kind of keeping up, and which is another piece of it, right? Especially when if you're doing an assessment selection like a pipeline that's really long. Like I think the longest one is PJ's, like the
Oh
pararescue.
yeah. Yeah. That's
Uh,
like 18 months.
so so to
Yeah.
so again, for 18 months to maintain to stay, and that's kind of
And
this
that's
study.
after selection.
Yeah.
That's after selection. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
that's another kind of thing to think about is, okay, I've peaked, I've made it through selection, but then how do I, maintain through all this training pipeline I gotta go through?
Yeah, this is a neat one because it walked them through 204 days of
Yeah.
in between courses. The ITC, which is the individualized training course, and the assessment and selection. And the time in between that, and that's significant.
Yeah, and MARSOC, there's not a lot of stuff on it, maybe because they're the newest, special operations. But I will say this because I want to give them, we'll give the Marines some love.
Oh yeah.
In I believe to date this still holds true. The MARSOC Raider course there, that it's the Derna Bridge or whatever their final assessment we is the highest energy expenditure recorded at Usarium. The Marines were burning more calories than I think they beat dive school.
Oh wow.
For that iteration, for that
Yeah, that
thing.
time period.
Yeah, so they were they're getting after it.
Yeah, and dive school eats up a lot of calories. You
Oh
don't
yeah,
realize how much calories you're burning. Just by staying warm, right? I mean, you're eating up extra extra calories as well. Okay, so here's I saw some other ones, and you got the Navy SEAL one here. I think I've read this one too. I might have even done a podcast on this one as well. This is um, basically, for probably 20 something years now, they have been taking data
yes,
of their students, not only their physical scores, but where they come from, their background, one parent, two parent, religious, and they got this huge amount of data, and they have put it into these consumable informational studies versus just raw data. And it seems like you broke that one down for us as well.
yeah, and really again the Navy SEAL community, again to my knowledge, is the first community in special operations to really start treating their folks like athletes in terms of getting athletic trainers, strength coaches, all like that's the model that all of special
That's true.
operations went after. And so yeah, their data collection, looking at all these other variables. I think they're the first, and that's why they have the most rich kind of data to mine there. So yeah, this study was looking at like those that were successful, being married,
Yeah.
a certain age, bracket, obviously swimming proficiency, which this one I thought there was some great kind of discussion with that is with minorities that might not have access to swimming pools, things like that. Like that's a discussion because you're missing out on potentially those candidates, and that's what this kind of one of the findings of that. The other finding that was kind of interesting was left-handed individuals don't do as well as right-handed individuals.
I saw that.
Because it was like down to that level of detail that I don't know if any other special operations selection like has it to that granular level. And I can't explain why, some of the other stuff you could see, you could be like, I could see that. The left versus right-handed, I don't know, Stu, anything you could think of having been through buds?
I have no idea. Other than, it's it is, you learn how to shoot differently with your left and
Yeah,
your right, but I don't see how it applies very
yeah.
much. I don't really think it matters. I mean, but there's so much bias in how things are made, and they're probably made by right-handed people. So
Yeah.
even an obstacle course, may favor a right-handed person than a left-handed person because of the way there's just
Different things are laid out.
institutional bias in how things are made, not on purpose, just
Right.
the way it is. But that I'm reaching on that one.
Yeah, yeah, but no, that was the one finding that I couldn't really explain. Thinking about it, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, but this is great. I love it because it has everything from emotional stability, which is just maturity
Yeah.
to a degree. Um, team orientation, ability to deal with stress. I mean, this goes all over the place, and it's a little bit different from the previous ones because we talked about MARSOC and Rangers. You know, swimming proficiency is obviously probably a number one. You just got to be comfortable in the water. I mean, I've had all American wrestlers, you know, who didn't do well at SEAL training just because that was one of their weaknesses. Water is a weakness, especially to land athletes. I think one of the things that I try to really focus on in my coaching is taking a land athlete and turning them into a spec ops swimmer, which if you compared it to competitive swimming, it's probably about the level of like 11, 12-year old competitive swimmer. Right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you said. I was actually wondering that. I was like, so would a SEAL be like a low level college swimmer
No,
mostly? So okay, not even
not
there.
even. High school kids will tear them. I mean, the reason why I actually came up with that, and it's not a theory, is because when we're swimming, there's like this elementary school swim team right next to us, and they're just lapping us. You know, I mean, they're doing a different stroke than us and everything, but they're just so much more efficient. But so yeah, swimming proficiency very important. A lot more stress on the aerobic side. One of the common sayings that when it comes to SEAL training is it's a running man's game. Is what they say. Now, obviously, you need some strength and durability and things like that. But to be honest with you, that ends after Hell Week, which is the fourth week, and then you got another 21 weeks of training that turns into this run, ruck, swim, tactical training. So it's kind of more of a triathlon world, on the back half. But the front end is strength and durability. The back end is more running and swimming and rucking. So yeah, yeah, man, they really went deep into this.
Yeah.
One thing that I would add into this about the age range is that if you want a decreased age range or a decreased attrition rate, start this thing off at 20 years old.
Mm.
You know what I mean? 20 years old is the youngest you can do going to SEAL training, and it would make a huge difference because a lot of that attrition rate are teenagers. And
I was wondering if you go the other route because something I saw that was very interesting in Israel. So I had a chance when I was on active duty to go over there with their military twice, and I'll never forget their version of the SEALs. I forgot what they were called, right? But it was like a high school bus pulled up to the ocean, and these were high school juniors doing open water swims. And these were the
okay,
ones that were identified that wanted to be SEALs. So
okay.
I was like, man, if we did that, I mean,
Oh,
I can't help but think their attrition rate's probably better because at 16, they're doing open water swims. And
100%,
yeah,
100%. But here's the problem: is you get a 18-year-old kid goes into the recruiter's office, says, "Okay, I'm going to ship out the day after I graduate high school," and they have the rest of high school to kind of prepare, but they're also playing sports. They're
oh,
doing
yeah.
things. They're being high school kids. They're not really focusing on the specifics of what they need to focus on. And they need some specificity, in their training. And I think that's the one thing that they're lacking. And they treat it like, well, even if they left in the fall, they'd be like, well, I got this 3 month summer. I'm going to focus on training. And, 3 months even isn't
Yeah.
enough. I can't tell you how many people I have coached, and even myself, it took me 18 months to transition out of a powerlifting football player into a average, above average spec ops candidate.
Wow.
So yeah, it takes a while, because when I started, 100 yards was long distance. Right. I always thought anything over 100 yards was long distance. And then I joined the military and I was like, what? I got to run a mile and a half? That's going to take forever. Right. And then as you evolve, you're like, a mile and a half is now my, fast pace, and then, I drop another mile per minute, minute per mile and, hit a 7-minute mile for a 5 miler. Right. So now I'm like learning pacing and things like that, which just takes time if you're not an endurance athlete. And you gotta, it really depends on your weaknesses. For most 18 and 19-year-old kids, they're not even finished growing yet. And then they show up there and they have this imposter syndrome almost immediately, because everybody that's in that class is 24, 22, tattooed up, shaving off their beard every morning. And they're like, holy crap! I just finished high school. I was talking about I just got out of my prom suit, and and so anyway, it's been one of those things for me. Whenever I discuss like people going to SEAL training, I said, if you really want to understand the attrition rate at SEALs, SEAL training is just understand it's a lot of young kids going, and it's skewed towards truthfully, woefully ill prepared.
Yeah.
And that's just all it is. For amount of information that's out there in the world today, they are still woefully ill prepared when they show up. Yeah, but you got all kinds of great stuff here. Everything from, another one on SEAL training, and you start getting into some supplements, which I think a lot of people don't understand very well. They'll hear about beta-alanine, but
Yes.
they're like, how do I use it? That's the smallest scoop I've ever seen in a supplement.
Yeah.
It's like, just use this much, right?
Well, and in this paper, it was really exciting because it's we were just talking about the IDF came out of Israel because beta alanine increases carnosine levels in the muscle, so your buffering capacity, right? Repeated sprints, like that's what we've known it to do.
Yep.
The Israelis are doing some really cool stuff looking at resilience and tactical function. I'll give you an example. I don't know if they highlighted, because this is reviewing here, but they even did a study where they took rats. It was rats or mice anyway, one of those, and exposed them to cat urine, predatory scent stress, and so it causes this animal to freak out. So it's a PTSD model, basically, right?
Okay.
So you get a post-traumatic stress disorder in this animal by keep exposing it to this predatory scent. And one group got a placebo and one group got beta-alanine. And then they were able to look at their reactions, and they ended up sacrificing the animal and measuring some of the content of those neurotransmitters and things in their brain. And what they found was the rats that got the beta-alanine had higher brain-derived nootropic factor, this thing that made them more resilient and positive. So that's from an animal setting. So from that, they're taking it and using it in humans now in Israel, trying to see, can beta-alanine make these operators more resilient to this stress? And they're having some interesting findings. Dr. Jay Hoffman is leading that research, which you probably know. Jay.
Know him well. Yeah, he's all over the NSCA from back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, unbelievable researcher. So that was just some of the stuff bring to light. Because when I talk about beta-alanine, a lot of times people know the athletic. It's been shown in boxers to be able to throw more punches, things, which is all great. But I don't think they understand the cognitive piece that we're starting to see, kind of like creatine. If you remember, creatine was like all muscle, all strength.
Oh, here we go.
There was just a paper with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, this one's a beta-alanine and creatine combo.
Yes. Study. Yeah. Yep. So stacking those together is very exciting. And then a little tidbit, for the listeners is that's kind of cool. I think you talk about an incredible career. I think he passed away this past year, but it was Dr. Roger Harris out of the UK. Bro, he started creatine and beta-alanine. He's the one that kind of studied them both and brought them
Brought
to
them
market.
into the supplement world.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Here's a good one. Elite military performance, the secrets.
Yeah.
So
You got a pretty catchy title. I don't know if there's any really secrets, but you know
right.
that'll get somebody to click at least.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's half of this is clickbait. No,
I will say that you know to give people the secret is a lot of hard work, a lot of prep.
There you go. There's a secret.
Mental toughness.
Yep.
You know. So that's you know what you see, but yeah, you see some of the similar things in terms of looking at these different metrics. You know what metrics matter is very interesting. I think from a physical assessment standpoint, and then even with the Navy SEAL study, we didn't really touch it, but what I get excited about, the nerd in me, is they were looking at like neuropeptide Y and uric acid and some of these biomarkers that might be predictive. Now, full disclosure, if you look at some of the biomarkers, some of those biomarkers are influenced by training. So if you know, chicken or the egg, but it's still an exciting prospect to look at.
Yeah. They've been looking at neuropeptide Y for a while now. I mean, who was it from Yale that was doing it in divers? And I think it was a Yale psychologist.
I have to look it up.
Yeah. Anyway, he's been looking at it. Remember when we were saying, you know, there were no studies in the 90s, 80s, and 90s about it.
Yeah.
He was doing studies in the 80s and 90s about it.
That's awesome.
It was like, you know, that far back. Why study? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Yale study. Yeah, I'll find it in a minute. It'll pop up. Anyway, but yeah, these are incredible. In fact, let me show you something. I'm going to share something else with you here. I made this a long time ago, and you know how we talk about, like we were talking about all the world class things. You know,
Yes.
we're all world class until we're not. Like we're world class in nothing, but we are in everything, right? So I made this. VIN diagram a long time ago, and I may have shared it with you a while back ago. But as you can see, if you really want to be an active duty operator, it comes down to two things: longevity and optimal performance. And then everything in here is the same, right? Whether you want to have longevity or you want to have optimal performance, it comes down to this bottom half down here, which is stress mitigation, physical, mental, emotional, you know, your recovery, your nutrition, your sleep, flexibility, mobility. But these up here are markers that are usually tested in physical training. You got strength, power, speed, agility coming into the durability side of what you need. You have aerobic, anaerobic conditioning, muscle stamina coming into the work capacity side. You know, you just got to be able to work all day, recover fast. And down here is more of the stability. I call it your mindset, some, you know, kind of intangibles, your coordination, your job skills, your ability to learn through a fire hose, you know, and repeat it under stress. So this is my VIN diagram for the tactical athlete, and really why they can't be world class in any one thing. Because usually when you have a world class number somewhere, there's an equal and opposite non-world class weakness, well, I should say world class weakness, that usually accompanies it, whether it's strength and endurance, it's speed and pace, you know, whatever,
or the mental toughness. I mean, there's some, you know, great case studies in like super high level athletes that just like the mental piece is not there.
Oh yeah.
in terms of like that toughness and ability, under pressure, to really, handle it.
I tell you what, let's do one more study. Any particular one? Oh, here's one. We'll talk Army this time, and this one is a recent one you posted that I was. I'm always trying to stay on top of changes that occur to the physical fitness testing, and let
Yes,
me just tell you, that in itself is a full-time job in all the branches
especially
of
lately.
services, all the branches of service, military, law enforcement, firefighters, everybody's making changes. I would say probably in the last 5 years, you know, I think there have been probably the most changes I've ever seen. A lot of it was sit ups to plank.
Yeah.
And then the Army got creative and said, yeah, we're not going to do sit ups or plank. We're going to do this leg tuck thing.
Yes.
And which, by the way, I love. I think it is just adds another dimension to your physicality of just grip, which I can't tell you how important grip training is to all of this. I mean, it's probably one of the best indicators on whether or not you're going to do well, you know, with grip, not only just with um, optimal performance, but longevity as well.
Oh yeah. All the things of grip strength's been core. I mean, marksmanship. Like if you're, especially like when you include pistols and
Yep.
rope climbing and all those things, right?
So what was the big thing here with the leg tuck versus the plank
Oh,
controversy?
it's if you were in the Army and you're listening to this and it had been around, it was a big deal. So when the Army combat fitness test initially rolled out, it had the leg tuck in there, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
all leg tuck is I grab a bar, I'm at 90 degrees, and I bring my knees up to my elbow, down all the way down, up one. And so you just had to do, one leg tuck. That was it to pass. And then I think 20 was the max, right? And it was a great assessment. And why it was a great assessment was, Usarium had done research and had shown when you look at like basic soldier tasks, what you need, evacuate a casualty,
Yep.
build a bunker, move things. All like that. They looked at different physical assessments and how they related to those soldier tasks. And the leg tuck was one. It hit all those things. You've got some core strength, you've got pulling strength, you've got all these other factors, you've got grip strength, as you said, Stu.
And you got dynamic core.
Yeah,
Dynamic core.
dynamic. And so, well, and even it's in I can't think the training circular right now, but it was, there's a climbing drill that the Army does that the leg tuck's part of it. So it's,
Yep.
it's been around. It wasn't like they just created it. And so it was this great assessment, but where a lot of the pushback came back, because I was on active duty at the time when it was rolled out, where, I would hear people be like, well, I can't do a leg tuck. And then this is what I'd ask them to do. I'd be like, well, have you ever trained to do a leg tuck? And they would say no. And I'm just like, to me, what was crazy about this time in the Army was the audacity of individuals to think they should be able to do something that they've never trained for.
I agree.
Right, like that was the expectation, where people didn't want to do the leg tuck because they couldn't do a leg tuck. And I'm like, well, why don't you just train and do the leg tuck? And if you look at the data and what happened during that period of time when we had the leg tuck, people trained to do the leg tuck, and you had a lot more people doing leg tucks. As soon as they offered the plank option, and I saw this, even at West Point, because we would do with the cadets, and man, all those cadets could do leg tucks. Like they were leg tucks.
Yeah.
And then they said, okay, you can do the plank instead. And so what would happen is cadets who I knew could do leg tucks, but they could max the plank because it was easier. Guess what they would choose? They would choose to do the plank. I mean, they're smart, right? They're going to game the system to get the score.
Yeah. And you'd be a little less tired to do your 2-mile run.
A little less tired to do your 2-mile run. So we saw that, and then eventually the Army's like, all right, let's go to the plank. Let's go the easy route. And that's what happened. And because of this, some great researchers, Dr. Jeff Heilson, Dr. Jay Dawes out of Oklahoma State. Everybody knows Jay. Does a lot with tactical athletes. And Tina Sergey, hopefully I'm saying your right name, she was a student there at the MPN, did this great study where they looked at it. They had these participants come in, they did leg tuck versus plank and looked at the predictive nature of it. And they found what had previously been found was, guess what? The leg tuck's the superior assessment. And so this was just published this year. I don't know if the Army will go back to it. There's a great guy named Alex Moreau and Drew Hammond, two great guys that run the Mops and Mo's podcast, and they start this movement, Leg Tuck Nation. And so they're trying, it was unbelievable, Stu. When the Army announced like the leg tuck was going away, Alex had a whole like sticker campaign and all these things to try to, to save the leg tuck. It did get saved, but now I think a lot of people are hopeful that it might come back, just because again, it's a quality assessment that relates to the effectiveness of those combat tasks, and that's ultimately what we want, right? We're
Absolutely.
not, we're not doing assessments just to do assessments, and I think that's what people need to understand. If you're working with athletes or anything, like, you don't just test the test. There has to be a meaning behind each test and each assessment. And really, right now for the plank, there's not much of a combat so what behind it.
Yeah, I always thought this: if you make a test and like hold true to it, don't weaken the standards, don't fall, when there's pushback, people are going to start training for the test. And if you can make a test better than push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run, which the old test was. I'm talking, recently. It goes back not that long ago to they changed to the ACFT, which has better tests in it, better exercises that if you practice deadlifts and sled pulls and farmer carries and sprinting, and you practice these things, one, you're going to get better at them, and if you're only practicing push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run, your durability on that battlefield and your work capacity is going to be somewhat limited to what you can do well.
No, that was, so when we, it was Danny McMillan, Rob Montz, and myself, and a guy named Matt Wilson, came up with those raw assessments, the Ranger Athlete Warrior assessments. Because at the time, that was all you had was the APFT, push-ups, sit-ups, and the 2-mile run. And the Ranger leadership realized that wasn't cutting it. So we made, knowing that everybody trains to the test, like everybody trains to the test. We know that. We made this broad thing where it's like we had the Illinois agility test at the time. They've since moved to the 5-10-5. We had an anaerobic 300-yard shuttle. We had the run. We had the deadlift. We had the push-ups. We had all this. So it's like, okay, if you just trained all those things, to your point,
perfect,
you're a pretty well-rounded athlete. Like you're going to be good. So it's like, make the assessments challenging and meaningful, and then I think history and the data shows people will rise to it, versus if you lower the bar for individuals, they're not going to get any better. Like, I guarantee you, since the Army has switched to the plank, there's less people who can do leg tucks. Whereas at the height of when the ACFT was like, hey, it's leg tucks, I saw a lot of people. I had, lieutenant colonels in their office with pull-up bars that I had never seen before. They were putting pull-up bars in their office to practice doing leg tucks during the day because they knew the ACFT was coming up.
And guess what? Guess what? You're going to get better at leg tucks. You practice leg tucks.
Because a lot of people had never done pull-ups before.
Yeah.
I saw individuals start to be able to do pull-ups, start to be able to do it was having such an effect that I don't think gets talked about enough in terms of culture and people, because it was challenging for a large part. I'm medical, right? I came from the medical side of the Army. I was at Fort Sam Houston. So medical is usually a little behind the combat arms when it comes to fitness. And I saw it changing because these medical folks, they knew that leg tuck was coming. And so they were training for it, and it was awesome.
And most of us in the military too understand all right, here's the standard.
Yeah.
Here's the test. I need to start getting better at this. And it's really, I was shocked that we went left and right. It just kind of waved, as the wind was blowing. Um, with some of these changes, SEAL community did something very similar. They had created this human performance test, probably about 12 years ago, and it had a deadlift, it had body weight bench, had weight vest pull ups, it had a still had a swim, had a run, had a ruck. I mean, it had everything that we do, and they went back to they scrapped it and went back to the old test. Because that's everybody wanted to swim, run, and do pull up, push up, sit ups.
It's wild. The military as a whole, I think I can talk to all, sister serves, everybody is like, we hate change. It's just, it's just anything. Like, I remember coming in the Army right as they were getting rid of, I think I did, as a lieutenant, I did one bayonet assault course. Remember the bayonet assault
Oh
course?
yeah. Oh yeah.
And I remember when they were getting rid of the bayonets, like people were, like it was like, oh, you can't get rid of the bayonet. It's like, what are we?
I'll tell you what, when it comes down to when you're doing bayonets, something's gone wrong.
Right, exactly. It's like if we, but at the time, it was. If we would have stuck with that way of thinking, can you imagine? Like you said, it's like, all right, fix bayonets, and we're going to charge this drone swarm coming at us. Like, so I see the fitness with that as well. Is
Sure.
people get hung up as like, all right, I always did push-ups and sit-ups. Why can't you do that? And it's like, no, I believe the fitness tests should change. It should evolve. Like it should be.
Oh yeah.
It shouldn't be. We shouldn't have the same fitness assessment for 20 or 30 years.
No, I
right?
agree.
Like if it changes, great. But like let's make it better. Let's make it more challenging versus, all right, let's think of how we can lower this bar.
I would agree. And if we're going to define tactical fitness as in I guess a way to define it would be we are trying to get people good at everything and not particularly great at one thing and weak at something else. Right? That is a loosely defined term.
Yeah.
And what is everything? We're talking speed, power, agility, strength. We got endurance, muscle stamina. We got flexibility, mobility. We got grip. All of those things are very important to the tactical athlete, and you just need to be good at all of them. And if
Yeah.
you're not testing them, you're probably not practicing them.
Yeah.
You know.
No,
Yeah,
it's
but
true.
anyway, this is good stuff, and it goes long past. Your Instagram page here goes well past just talking about military stuff. This is for everybody from, what vitamin B does to your bones, which
Yeah.
that was interesting.
Yeah,
That
that's a
was
recent.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thyman for bones. I wouldn't have thought. No, that gets me excited. And then some of the stuff with potential detoxificants, like with the lead exposure that the military faces. Because
Oh
now,
yeah.
again, being a veteran on the backside, and looking at like the health issues, with organizations like Hunter 7, where they're seeing, you're finding these cancer rates in these healthy individuals who are fit, who are young, but we're exposed to a lot of contaminants, in overseas. And so now I'm really like looking at different nutritional interventions that can be used to help with that. And I know some other dietitians in the soft community are doing the same. So that's another really exciting area that I hope to explore more.
Oh man. Yeah, that's huge. Very huge. And you got everything from, weight loss to military blast exposure and some of
Yeah,
the causes there with leaky gut and
that's another group, and I don't know. I don't want to give them. I don't know if that's Hunter 7 as well, but there's another military group that's really putting that. And that was actually an individual. Oh, and he's listening. Mine sent me that study on Instagram. So that's the other beauty of being more active. He sent me that study to ask about it, and I'm like, well, hey, I'll do a write up on it and get it out there, because that's the one paper I found on blast exposure and leaky gut. So
Right.
here, we know the brain issues, but now, you're a breacher for all these years, and, you're having these gut issues, and now looking at this research towards it. Because
I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes sense between TBI and digestive issues. I mean, those are a lot of air spaces, in the body can definitely be affected.
Yeah, overpressure from all these different weapon systems that are being used. I think, sadly, we're going to find out it probably does a lot more than we thought, right, or knew. So but the great thing is we're looking at it now, so it's exciting.
All right, so you also have a podcast.
I
right?
did.
Fuel the Fight. Do you do that much?
I don't. Maybe if anybody, if you guys post or whatever, and you want me to fire it back up as a civilian, I can. I haven't done it. That podcast, why that podcast was created was I was the program director at the master's program in nutrition, and it was a recruitment tool to get the word about the program and stuff. So I still have the episodes up. Had some great guests on there, but I could fire it back up if people were interested in hearing what myself and some other colleagues have to say, then I'd be happy to do it.
Well, I will tell you this. I am locked on to this thing every day. I get little notifications whenever you post, and I'm like, what has he posted today? So I make sure I like it, and I share it, and I try to get your name out there, and I'm trying right now. So if you guys don't follow Nick Barringer.phd.rdn, you should. And if you're looking for that link, I'll have it on my Instagram as well as on the description here. But yeah, this is just such a wealth of knowledge, and I always feel smarter scrolling on your page, right? Versus sometimes you just waste time scrolling.
I'm guilty of that too, Stu.
And but no, I always feel smarter after seeing your page. So I appreciate you putting all this information out there because it's needed. It's needed because there's a lot of information out there for everybody to have, but it's hard to consume it all properly, and you're breaking it down to consumable bites that can be very useful. So thank you.
No, thank you, Stu, and I appreciate what you've been doing for all these years, because I look at your Instagram to get motivated, because half the time I'm just like waking up, getting my kids dressed, and you're out there crushing it with a bunch of college students and high school students doing some workout.
So fun. They give me hope for the future. But yeah, we try to be motivating. We try to stay consistent. Yeah, that's the thing that I is what I have to work on every day is consistency, which we all do. So
yeah. Awesome.
Well, all right, Nick, I appreciate your time. Thanks for giving us another hour. I'm going to put a link to all Nick's shows that he's done with us in this description, so you guys can check those out. But number one, go to his Instagram and get smarter. That's awesome. My last piece of advice for you.
Thank you, Stu. I appreciate that, buddy.
Thank you. Until next time, we'll come back with another tactical fitness report.